Welcome back, everybody. This is Tom Christie. This is session 4 of the Drake King Eider. We carved the head in the previous sessions. I've got that sanded and smoothed and ready to go. That looks good. In this final session, I talked about doing inserts on the Drake King Eider's back for these horn feathers. So I've got my holly ready to go, and we'll talk through that, but this will be a relatively short video. I just wanted to finish up with in case you have to do hardwood inserts, this is just one way of doing it, and let's get going. Okay, I've traced the side profile of the horn feathers on this block, and I'm going to carefully cut that out. And we're going to need 2 of these. And right now I'm only worried about the side profile. I want to get that nice high horn feather profile. So the reason I'm cutting these out together is this gives me a little bit of a handle to hang on to as I follow those profiles of the horn feathers. I've also put a little bit of excess material under the feather, because that's the part that will insert into the decoy and epoxy into the decoy body. So I'm cutting the 2 feather profiles out. You have to go slow with holly. It's a very hard wood, so the bandsaw needs a little time to be able to cut through it. I'm going to back that out very carefully. And then separate the 2 blocks. So I keep my hands away from the bandsaw that way. Now we have the 2 horn feather profiles. By the way, I had taken my pattern and used my awl and went around the horn feather down profile so that I know where they are located on the body. And another thing to note is when I rounded this with the bandsaw, I made sure I didn't cut into that area because I want a flat surface here to put in my inserts. Now I know a little bit about the shape of these feathers. The high point of the horn is going to be on the outboard side of each of these, and then it goes down to a point down here. So eventually I'm going to be taking all of this off and leaving this point high. And the feathers are about this size according to my pattern. So I can do a little bit more work with the bandsaw carefully to shape these up before we insert them. And I'll do that now. All right, we've got those cut, and I can save myself a little bit of grinding by angling this piece and removing these pieces. And I'm going to do that on the coping saw, since these pieces are getting pretty small to hang on to with the bandsaw. And I've got good area to clamp to down here, so we'll just take that off with the coping saw so we don't have to grind all of that material off. And then we'll be ready to insert these. Okay, I'm clamped on to the base that's going to be embedded. In case I mark up the wood, it's going to be buried. And I'm just using the coping saw to very carefully take off this angle cut. And I'm headed down to here. Holly's pretty hard, so you just have to take your time to get through it. I'll just speed up the video. I am taking my time. I just sped up the video to get us through this a little quicker. All right, now we've got something we can insert and carve. I'll do that on the other horn feather. We'll be ready to go. All right, I've got my pieces cut and ready to go. And I want to focus on this that I laid out from the pattern. So that point, I want to make sure this high point I locate right there and trace around the wood the way I have it cut. Even though it's not perfect, this is the shape that I need to insert into my body, decoy body, that is. I'll do that on this side as well, locating on that outside dimension like the other. Try to keep my hands out of the way so you can see what's going on. Just make the point here again that the shapes are not perfect, but once the wood is embedded, I can shape those feathers exactly the way I want them. Okay, so these are the places I need to take out wood and create two pockets that then I can glue these into the bird or epoxy them back into the bird. I'm just going to use that 1/4-inch diameter burr and just open up those pockets very carefully, just going a little bit at a time, and I'm going to speed through this to see the end result. I'm using the end of the burr here, kind of like a milling bit, to take wood out. Now I'm changing to the pyramid shape ruby grinder to kind of get in the corners and clean things up as a final step. So I've got that where I've got a good fit on that horn feather, and now I'll work on the opposite side. Same process. All right, I've got my pockets finished. Those are ready to be inserted, but I'm not going to glue them in place right now because I want to hollow this decoy, and it's just going to be easier to work with it without the horn feathers on the back of the decoy when I split it, turn it over, and hollow it out. So I'm going to leave those off, carve around it, and then I can insert those, and I use DevCon 2-part 5-minute epoxy and mix sawdust in with that, and it makes a nice strong adhesive with a little bit of filler with the sawdust in there to fill these gaps around the feathers, and then you can carve them just like they were a part of the body, and this feather will be undercut, but they'll be nice and strong, made out of that holly material. I've got the decoy hollowed now, so I went ahead and inserted the holly horn feathers. There's that mix. I just get this powdered dust out of the vacuum cleaner, mix that with the 2-part DevCon epoxy, and then use that to lock those horn feathers in place. I let that epoxy dry overnight, and now I'm going to go in with an old bullet-nosed saber-tooth burr fine bit. And by old, I mean it's loaded up with epoxy and resin. Not that good to carve wood with anymore, but it's good for this purpose because these epoxies tend to load up burrs, and so I just keep an old one around, at least one, for this job right here. And it still takes material off, and I'm not worried about loading it up with the epoxy. So I'm just shaping these feathers and blending them into the surrounding area, and I'll speed this up so we can watch that quickly. Just using this 3/4-inch bit, round nose bit, primarily on the top side of these feathers, it's too big to start undercutting the feathers with. So we'll change bits to do that job, but this does a great job of removing all that epoxy and starting to round the feathers and blend them in. Now I'm going to switch bits to that teardrop shape burr, and this will allow me to get in between the feathers and continue the removal of material, and I'll also use that to undercut the feathers. You can see in this shot I've undercut the feathers slightly. I didn't want to go overboard because we want to maintain strength. Even though it's holly, it needs strength and support. So now I'm using my drum sander and just further blending things in and smoothing the grinding lines out. This shows you the shape of those feathers. And also by sanding, I can see what condition the epoxy is in, and I see there are some air bubbles that came up through the epoxy, which is no big problem. We'll use a little filler to close those up later. So this is just general sanding and shaping up. Just show you some different views of the feathers here as I finish the drum sanding. And I'm going to shift to some hand sanding now, just to finish things up and get into nooks and crannies where you can't get in with the drum sander. These horn feathers now out of holly are really solid and stable and strong, so I don't have to worry about strength. Just shifting to a little sanding paper bit. It's rolled paper. Just to get in the nooks and crannies again and finish the sanding and just clean things up. So I'll speed through that. Just blending things out as much as possible and softening things, and then we'll do a little bit of filler work to fill any gaps that are left over. I've got just a few air bubbles around where that epoxy set, so I'm just using a little Bondo. I'm going to force that in those areas. Here's a tip. Don't use acetone to clean the area and not let it dry, because that acetone is trying to bubble out of there. So I'm going to have to do that again. Hopefully that acetone will find its way out of there. I don't need much, just a few areas that need to be blended out. I should be using that Bondo spreader that Bonds got me at the Ohio show, but some old habits die hard. And we don't want any visibility of the insert in the finished decoy. So I'd rather do a little bit more sanding. And get rid of that separation line or any bubbles that are visible. So I'll work on that, but you get the idea. All right, I've got that spread around. We'll let that dry. I'll sand it off and we'll be good to go. Well, that is a wrap on session 4 of carving the King Eider drake. I hope the techniques that I demonstrated on the head and also the insertion of these horn feathers are helpful to you. Like I said, you may not be working on a King Eider drake right now, but I encourage you to tackle it at some point. They're a lot of fun to work on. Hey, I hope to see some of you at the World Carving Championships in April. I'm going to be driving out there on the 18th. I'll be there on the 19th. The carving championships really need us to show up this year. You're probably aware the Salisbury University is no longer sponsoring the Ward Foundation, so they're kind of out there on their own. And I'm going to show up and be a part of that show and do whatever I can to volunteer my help, and I would encourage you to do the same thing. Until next time, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.